This is the Asus PA32UCDM. It's a QD-OLED monitor that uses the exact same panel found in Flanders Scientific's XMP310 and SmallHD's Quantum32. Why is that significant? Because while they cost over $10,000, the ProArt costs under $2,000. For that and other reasons, this monitor is attracting a lot of interest. Now, the XMP310 and Quantum32 are considered as excellent reference displays. Is the PA32UCDM a viable reference monitor? Can it rival the quality of its more expensive counterparts that use the exact same panel? This video is sponsored by Audiio. Get an entire year of music, sound effects, and access to incredible AI tools that help you find the right music without taking away your creativity for just $60 using our discount code. Before answering those questions, it might be helpful to give our conversation some context. OLED stands for Organic Light Emitting Diode. Now, unlike LCDs, OLEDs do not have a backlight. Instead, each pixel provides its own light. As a result, OLEDs have incredible contrast ratios, as when a pixel is off, there's no bleed through from an always-on backlight. Here's where things get complex. LCD is a mature technology. OLED is an emerging technology. As a result, both OLED and LCD have unique advantages. LCD technology is typically capable of higher levels of brightness than OLED. That's not to say that there aren't incredibly bright OLED monitors available. So let's put it another way. An OLED monitor of a specified brightness will often cost more than its LCD equivalent. Also, OLEDs are more susceptible to aging and image burning on account of the organic materials used in their construction. Within the OLED category, there are variations on the way that panels produce their light and mix the red, green, and blue. For example, WOLED or QD-OLED. WOLED panels generate white light that is then passed through color filters to produce red, green, and blue. It's a very durable technology, but the color filters reduce the output and ultimately limit the panel's brightness. Some WOLED panels use white pixels in addition to the R, G, and B. This boosts brightness but comes at the cost of color gamut and accuracy at high brightness levels. QD-OLED panels use a blue light source that is shone through quantum dots to produce red and green light. The technology is more expensive than WOLED panels, and those blue light sources are prone to aging quicker, but they have some key advantages. They are capable of much higher levels of brightness, and their colors can be more accurate and vibrant. This is the technology that is used in the PA32UCDM. OLED panels can be prone to aging and image burning. The PA32UCDM has a really cool trick. If I fill the screen with a solid color, you'll notice that the bevels are not even. That's because the OLED panel is larger than 3840 by 2160. You'll never notice, but the monitor will periodically shift your image up, down, left, or right. That means that static UI elements won't burn into the same pixels every time you run your computer. Heat is also a significant factor in the aging of a monitor. As a result, most panels feature automatic brightness limiting, ABL for short. It will limit the brightness of the screen in particular scenarios to protect the panel from excessive heat. For example, a panel might only allow a certain percentage of the display to be driven at its full brightness. If the image exceeds that threshold, the image will be dimmed to keep it within specs. Why is understanding all of this important? There's two reasons. The first is pretty simple. You need to understand what you're buying. The headline specs don't tell you everything about a monitor. Sometimes you need to dig a little bit deeper. The second is more nuanced. Each technology that we've discussed has different strengths and weaknesses. LCD is not perfect, but neither is OLED yet. And even as new and better technologies emerge, they will carry a price premium. So even if you find a monitor that has perfect color and brightness, its weakness might be its price. Here's an example. One of the most common monitors that you will find in high-end grading suites around the world is the Sony BVM HX310. It's a phenomenal monitor. It might surprise you to know that it's not an OLED display, it's actually an LCD. Actually, it's two LCDs sandwiched together. To overcome the contrast limitations of LCD technology, it uses an additional black and white LCD panel to control the brightness of the backlight. It's sort of like the display has an individual dimming zone for each pixel, like it has 8 million dimming zones. Thanks to its use of LCD technology, the panel can drive the entire image at 1000 nits. There's no ABL. All of that comes at a cost, $20,000. If you're working on the right kind of content and making the right kind of money, this might be the perfect monitor for you. For others, that exceeds their budget. So when purchasing a reference monitor, there's always going to be a compromise. But that doesn't need to be an issue as long as you understand it. Now that we have a better understanding of the underlying technology, let's get back to talking about the PA32UCDM. If you want an awesome color grading or editing monitor, it needs to be able to display the standards you are mastering in. For the past 3 decades, Rec 709 has been the dominant standard. Now the industry is slowly transitioning to standards like Rec 2100, P3PQ, or for SDR, Rec 2020. If you want to make your purchase future-proof, it should be capable of supporting those standards. We can divide compatibility into 3 categories. First, inputs. I don't mean the physical connection, I mean the protocols used to communicate with the monitor. This monitor supports HDR10, Dolby Vision, and any SDR signal that you can feed through a USB-C or HDMI connection. HDMI and USB-C isn't really suitable for on-set use, neither is the monitor's form factor, but this will make a great monitor for studio use. Second, color gamut. Asus advertises 100% Rec 709 and 99% P3. Finally, category 3, brightness. According to the specs, this monitor is capable of 1000 nits of peak brightness, but it's an OLED. As a result, it features ABL. Let's talk. According to specs, to protect the panel, automatic brightness limiting will engage when the monitor is in its maximum brightness mode if the amount of the image at 1000 nits exceeds 3% of the total screen area, or the average picture level, APL for short, exceeds 3%. When you think about it, those 2 stats correlate with each other because 3% of the monitor at 100% power is the same power consumption as 100% of the monitor at 3% power. Here's some things to note. ABL only affects HDR monitoring. SDR brightness levels will never trigger ABL. So for example, in the monitor's Rec 709 preset, you'll never experience ABL. But even when working on HDR content, you can actually turn ABL off or reduce it by lowering the brightness of the monitor. When ABL does engage, the entire image is dimmed uniformly. That means the relationship between the brights and the darks in the image is unchanged. ABL isn't regrading your image, it's just dimming the monitor. Now this is really important. Asus aren't responsible for this limitation. It's actually built in by Samsung, who manufactures the panel. That means that the Flanders XMP310 and the Quantum32 from SmallHD have the exact same limitations. The 3% APL limitation is not as severe as you would think. Remember, HDR is about making images with deeper shadows and deeper highlights. It's not just about making images brighter. Otherwise, if you made the shadows bright too, well, those brighter portions of the image would lose their impact. As a result, the vast majority of an HDR image lives in the same brightness range below 1000 nits that an SDR image would live in, meaning that it's perfectly normal to find HDR shots that don't exceed 3% APL. Or when they do, they don't exceed it excessively. So how does that ABL affect your ability to use the PA32UCDM as a reference monitor? Well, firstly, if you're grading SDR, ABL is a non-issue, as true Rec 709 or P3 DCI or Rec 2020 never exceeds 100 nits. Of course, if you want a brighter monitor, you can go all the way up to 250 nits. What about for HDR? When using the monitor as a full-screen video viewer, either in clean feed mode or using an Ultra Studio, ABL is often hard to notice. That's because brightness values don't usually change drastically mid-shot, so the ABL adjustments are typically hidden on cuts. If brightness values do change in a scene, for example, panning towards a bright light source, again, the ABL is not noticeable as it will change gradually and be masked by the motion in the scene. When using the UCDM as a computer monitor, on the other hand, i.e. showing the operating system's interface, ABL is easier to spot. In this example, I'm running the monitor in HDR mode. Remember, you don't experience ABL in SDR modes. When I open a white website in a large browser window, it has a dramatic effect on the image's APL, causing the monitor to dim. This is an extreme scenario though. In fact, ABL is rarely an issue in the Resolve UI because the viewer only takes up a small portion of the screen, so has a lower effect on the image's APL. As a result, we found it very hard to show ABL screen dimming in the Resolve UI with moderately sized viewers. We like to say that the best monitor for color grading is the one that you have. As most monitors have weaknesses, even the more expensive ones, regardless of what you have, it's important that you understand the limitations of your hardware and how to work around them. Here's an example of that to drive the point home. Even an RE Alexa 35 will clip if you push your scene bright enough. So a cinematographer working with an Alexa must still understand the camera's limitations and plan around them, even if it is an Alexa 35. The important thing is that you know when ABL is being triggered. There's 2 reasons why that's important. First, it lets you know that your final image will be brighter than your monitor is telling you. And second, it lets you know that there's a good chance your grade will trigger ABL on the displays your audience will be using. To that end, we ran our own tests to confirm the monitor's advertised specs. Our friends Carl Hendrickson and Jason Bodak over at PixelTools kindly made a tool to help us analyze ABL on this or any monitor. I believe you'll be able to download this yourself. We'll put details in the description. Simply indicate the size and brightness of the patch you'd like to display. Using a Datacolor Spider Pro, we measured the brightness of different size 1000 nit patches. We did this at the monitor's max brightness settings and then the 400 and 250 nit modes. Here's the results. You can clearly see that in the monitor's max brightness mode, ABL engages at window sizes beyond 3%. In the monitor's 400 nit mode, ABL doesn't engage until around 12% window size. Finally, in the 250 nit uniform brightness mode, ABL does not engage at all. The patch has uniform brightness regardless of size, albeit at 250 nits. For our next test, we wanted to analyze how ABL responds to APL. It's sort of the opposite of the test we just performed. So we've set the window size to 100% and are changing the brightness instead. Again, you can see in the max brightness mode, ABL clearly engages at 3%. You might be wondering, why does ABL engage at 3%? Why doesn't it engage at 25%? Well, remember, 25% APL would be an entire screen at 250 nits, which the monitor is capable of. But 25% APL is the brightest that the screen can go. There's nothing left in the tank to make anything else brighter. By gradually engaging ABL from 3% onwards, it allows the panel to protect itself while maintaining that critical relationship between bright images and darker images, so that brighter images still look brighter and everything doesn't simply converge on one homogeneous tone. We also had a go at creating our own tool. Now, I'm not a DCTL whiz like Carl or Jason, but I do know my way around Fusion. This tool samples every pixel in the image and averages them to work out the current APL of any frame. There's also an indicator that shows when ABL is engaging. This isn't an exact science because there isn't precise information available. Consider this an approximation. Range 1 is configured to 3% APL. That's when ABL engages. I've set range 2 to 20%, where ABL's response starts to flatten. Consider this a prototype. I think there's still work to be done in validating that this tool is working as expected. This tool is not only useful for grading with the PA32UCDM, but it's also useful when using the Quantum32 or Flanders XMP310. You can download it for free using the link in the description. Before we continue, can we show you where we find music for our videos? Most library music websites feature filters that allow you to search by mood, genre, and instrumentation. Even then, it can still be hard finding the right music for your edit. Audiio has two incredible AI assistants that can help. First, Hans AI. Simply describe your video or describe the type of music you're looking for, and Hans will suggest 6 tracks that might fit. Second, Link Match AI. It's common to take inspiration from commercial music. If you've heard a song you like, provide Link Match with a link so it can listen. It will search Audio's own royalty-free library and suggest similar tracks that you can actually use. We love it when AI is used to enhance your creativity rather than replace it. Audiio has a ton of other features you'll love, but we think your favorite feature will be the incredible price. Using our discount code, you can get an entire year of Audiio for just $60. A big thank you to Audiio for supporting our videos. So here's the big question. Can you grade HDR content with a monitor that has ABL? In the case of the PA32UCDM, we'd say the answer is absolutely yes. Now that we have this super cool tool for monitoring APL, you can watch your own HDR content and other people's and get an idea for typical APL levels. You'll find that they often stay relatively low. In this sequence, they are regularly below 3, so no ABL being triggered. When they do stray above 3, they're relatively close, so will only trigger mild ABL. There are a couple of outliers, like this shot that clearly exceeds 3% APL. It's clear that in a lot of HDR content, ABL will rarely be triggered, or when it is triggered, not triggered strongly. On occasion though, there are legitimate shots where ABL will be triggered. It's important to remember that ABL is designed to be unnoticeable. It's meant to preserve the image's perceived qualities as it dims the monitor. It's not remapping the tones in your image, just lowering overall brightness. It's mostly going to affect you on those super strong high key images, which to be honest, a colorist will be careful with, because with 1000 nits at your disposal, you don't want to blind your viewers. Here's where you'll need to use your noggin. When working with images that have a high APL, if you're relying purely on your monitor, you might not realize how bright you've made the image, or the brightness of the screen might affect your perception of the colors in the image. A tool like our APL analyzer can make you aware of when this might be happening. You can also keep an eye on your scopes. If you want to see what your image would look like without ABL, here's a super simple hack. Scaling your image down will reduce your overall APL. So you can scale it to the point where ABL is no longer engaging. If you're concerned about ABL, you can investigate grading your HDR content in the monitor's 400 nit or uniform brightness 250 nit mode to reduce or completely eliminate ABL. You need to exercise caution here though, as those modes will remap the tones in your image to fit the now reduced dynamic range of the monitor. When two tones that are a stop apart are now squished, for example, into a quarter of a stop, it will have a significant impact on your perception of the image. Please note though, this is way easier to see in person. It's much harder to distinguish when looking at these screen recordings. Here's a roundup of our recommended monitor configurations. Of course, if you're using this as a dedicated reference monitor for grading SDR, ABL is not going to be an issue. If you're using this purely as a computer monitor, well, you don't need to worry about ABL or HDR. Operating systems and software mostly have SDR UIs, so you'll probably be running the monitor in an SDR mode. If you do want to run the monitor in its HDR mode, on a Mac, you hit this little button here. You might want to put the monitor in its 400 nit mode because those white web pages really wreak havoc with the image's APL. For HDR grading, our recommendation is to use the monitor in its 1000 nit mode with PQ set to optimized. This might not be up to the high standards of a $300 million movie, but it is more than suitable for a wide array of professional HDR content. It's also worth considering that many people will be watching your HDR content on devices with ABL. So there is a case to be made that monitoring with ABL is actually valuable in some scenarios because it better reflects your viewer's experience. There are other considerations that affect a monitor's suitability for reference work, most notably the monitor's accuracy and whether or not it can be calibrated. Asus provide their own free utility for calibrating their ProArt displays. As this monitor doesn't feature an inbuilt colorimeter, you will need to purchase a separate unit. This is a Datacolor Spider Pro. This puck comes with its own free calibration software, but the trouble with that is that the calibration profile is loaded onto the computer. It's reliant on software. If you calibrate the monitor and then connect it to another computer, it won't have your calibration. On the other hand, the Asus ProArt utility loads calibrations directly into the monitor. That calibration lives in the monitor and goes wherever your monitor goes. So for example, when using the monitor connected to an Ultra Studio, my calibration is present. Once done, it produces reports confirming the delta, that's the accuracy of the calibration. Each profile calibrates with a delta of less than 1. That's really good. This calibration utility is pretty significant because commercial calibration software costs thousands of dollars, a difficult justification when your monitor is less than $2,000. That said, the monitor is also compatible with professional calibration solutions like CalMan or ColorSpace. Vincent over at HDTV Test has an excellent video where he explores calibration of the monitor in great detail. He also compares it directly with monitors like the Sony BVM HX3110 and covers other technical aspects of the monitor not covered in this video. To get a fuller understanding of this monitor, please check out his video. There's a link in the description. Finally, let's show you how we have the hardware configured. It's possible to connect your computer directly to this monitor via USB-C or Thunderbolt 4. If you're working on a laptop, the monitor will provide 96 watts of power delivery, but I've decided to use a third-party dock. This is CalDigit's excellent Element Thunderbolt 5 dock. There's 3 reasons I'm using this. Firstly, if you're going to use the UCDM as a dock, its I/O is limited. It's only Thunderbolt 4 and there's a limited number of ports. The CalDigit dock gives me 3 Thunderbolt 5 ports, 2 USB-C ports, and 3 USB-A ports. That's epic. Second, the monitor's power supply fan can get a little loud when it's powering both the monitor and connected laptop. The dock circumvents that issue. And finally, why did I choose this dock? Simplicity. I don't need audio ports, SD card readers, or networking built into my dock. I just want as many USB-A, C, and Thunderbolt 5 connections as I can get. It's a great addition to any setup. It runs silent, it provides 140 watts of power, so more than the monitor, and because it's Thunderbolt 5, it's twice the bandwidth of Thunderbolt 4. Now, it is possible to connect your monitor directly to your computer and grade effectively using the UI within Resolve. However, this process is problematic as Resolve is forced to communicate with your monitor via the computer's operating system, whether on a Mac or Windows. This is perhaps a topic for a future video. As reference grading is the focus of this video, we're going to show the most robust way of connecting a monitor to your installation of Resolve. That's using a Blackmagic Video I/O device. My MacBook Pro M4 Max is connected to the CalDigit Elements Thunderbolt 5 dock. That cable is also providing my MacBook with power. All my computer peripherals are connected to that dock, including 10 gig Ethernet, storage, sound, and of course this Ultra Studio 4K. To take advantage of the UCDM's UHD resolution, this is the model that you will want. The monitor is connected to the Ultra Studio 4K via HDMI. In Resolve, I'm using Resolve Color Management. I have my output display transform configured to Rec 2100 PQ. I'm choosing to limit my gamut output to P3D65 as most monitors are not capable of displaying the Rec 2020 color primaries. On the monitor, I'm using the Rec 2020 PQ preset. I've already calibrated this profile with my Datacolor Spider Pro and the Asus Calibration utility. Now, this name is a little bit confusing. This is Rec 2100 PQ, but instead of calling it Rec 2100, this name is a combination of its color primaries and transfer function. You'll need to choose how the PQ signal is handled. There's 3 options: optimized, basic, and clip. These settings affect how brightness values that exceed the monitor's brightness are handled. You'll most likely want basic or optimized. They apply tone mapping to the signal so that it can fit the dynamic range the monitor is capable of displaying. Optimized applies compression in the highlights and preserves the linearity of the midtones. This produces images that look more natural as it mimics the way our own eyes respond to brightness. I'm going to choose optimized. I can now start grading with confidence that my image is accurate. It's as simple as that. The PA32UCDM is not a perfect monitor. A lot of people will gravitate towards talking about ABL, but for us, it's not a deal breaker. ABL is more common than you think, and if it's present in a $10,000 monitor, then it's fairly reasonable to see it in a monitor that costs less than $2,000. And while many HDR images will trigger ABL, they won't generally do so in a way that has a significant impact on your viewing or grading experience. Of course, we'd love a monitor that's capable of 100% APL, but until technology develops further, ABL is the cost you have to pay to own a reasonably priced monitor that doesn't suffer from the blooming artifacts that local dimming zone LCDs produce. Beyond that, is there anything else about this monitor that we don't like? It would be nice if the monitor was black. That suits grading and editing suites better. But from the front, you don't see much of that silver finish. The monitor can get a little noisy when you're using its power delivery function. We'd happily have a larger monitor with better passive cooling than a thin, stylish monitor that suffers from fan noise. Now, this is a small irritation, but we'd like to see more consistency in the way that these profiles are named in the menus. Finally, we'd love to see tools built into the monitor that help the user to understand when ABL is engaging. This could perhaps be an overlay in the corner of the screen that can be enabled in the menu. When Asus first announced this monitor's price, we were blown away. The PA32UCDM is incredible for grading SDR content. It's also fantastic for grading HDR. Not perfect, but amazing considering the price. The panel at the heart of this monitor is solid and more than capable of delivering a reference image. The monitor's ability to store calibrations internally further helps position this as a professional monitor. We don't think it's possible to find a more versatile, high-quality grading monitor for under $2,000. To really take advantage, there are additional accessories that you'll want to purchase. A colorimeter like the Datacolor Spider Pro. I love the convenience of a hub like this CalDigit Elements, but perhaps if you're using a desktop with more ports, this might not be necessary. And finally, you'll need an Ultra Studio 4K so you can bypass your OS and let Resolve speak directly to the monitor. I really wish I had an XMP310 or a Quantum32 to directly compare this to, but it's entirely reasonable to expect that this monitor is capable of delivering the same quality because it has at its heart the same panel and it's possible to calibrate. Now, does that mean that the Flanders and SmallHD are bad monitors or overpriced? No, absolutely not. They have valuable features that warrant their extra cost. Better connectivity, tools like scopes, split screen views, SDI connectivity, rugged enclosures that would survive on-set use, and so on. If you need those features, they are the better choice and their price is justifiable. If you don't, maybe you should check out the PA32UCDM. This may well be the grading monitor that you and a lot of other people have been waiting for. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a like, consider sharing with colleagues, and make sure you are subscribed so you don't miss out on future content. We put a great deal of effort into researching our videos. Monitoring is such a broad and complex topic. We've tried to simplify and condense relevant facts into this video. And of course, there are more rigorous approaches we could adopt when it comes to the calibration and setup of this monitor. If you feel like there is an area where we could have been more accurate, we're always learning. We'd love to hear from you in the comments. Thanks for watching.